As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. In this episode, we're going to change things up a little bit. Rather than having an outside expert to call on, I will be answering your questions about my path to becoming a reluctant prepper.
Our third question for making of a reluctant prepper comes from Jason S., who asks, could you explain the specific preparedness steps you have personally taken so far and what your priorities are to do next?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share the steps that we've taken so far, although everyone's path is different and they've got to evaluate where they're starting from and what their priorities are. For us, one of the greatest priorities we've talked about with many of the guests we've had on here is getting a supply of food. Because, obviously there's the rule of three, that you can only live like 3 minutes without air, and 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. So that's been a high priority for our family. We typically have had a pantry where we just kept sort of staples that we use for ingredients and cooking and that sort of thing, but we never really took seriously the idea of having some excess or extra food stores on hand in case of a disruption in our food supply. And I'm going to include in this episode some photos of some stores in our neighborhood where the shelves were stripped bare. Well, we had a serious snowfall this last winter in the Midwest with this polar vortex and all that, and people were stocking up beforehand. We saw an armed police officer guarding the exits of our local grocery store, and the shelves stripped bare. And when disruptions like that happen, and they will, whether it's from natural causes or from man-made causes, how people prepare ahead of time, it's too late at that point to prepare. So it's when, in the good times, setting aside extra so you can weather out those tough times. And a lot of our guests have said that there's a couple ways you can go. Some people do like meals ready to eat, which is military type rations, and everybody uniformly says they taste terrible, even though they have a really long shelf life. But the idea of having something around that's just going to be gosh awful to eat just really didn't appeal to us. So the other two options are to buy like freeze-dried or dehydrated emergency food, which we have some of, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But primarily, your number one option that our guests have recommended and is to just buy extra of what you normally would eat anyway if it's non-perishable, and then just use a rotation method. So we, when refinishing our basement, built an extra pantry room that has some nice shelving we put in there so that we have enough room to handle. It could handle months of food supply for us. Currently, I would say we're up to maybe 1 month, 3 weeks to 1 month of supply, and we're increasing from there. But basically, it's just that when you go to, and we happen to belong to one of these large-scale wholesale clubs, so that we can get larger quantities and really checking the freshness dates. I was shocked when checking the freshness dates on things that I assumed without thinking about it from the past, as we all tend to not have thought about maybe a lot of these things, but taken a lot for granted. I thought that the shelf life on things would typically be like a year or two, and I was surprised to find some of the shelf lives were significantly shorter than that. So try to pay attention to the shelf lives, but always putting the new purchased items behind, or have a left to right system, or some way that you routinely have of making sure that you're using up the oldest first and rotating your supplies. So we've got, number one, that's one of the changes that we made, was starting to purchase more of the things we buy. We typically have some canned tuna or salmon or canned chicken, so some canned meats. We have various types of beans, whether it's, we are kind of heavy into organics, other people aren't, but we purchase extra of different types of beans because they're high in protein and fiber and B vitamins, that sort of thing, and other pastas and things that have a longer shelf life, and rotate those. So we've got currently building up through about a month's worth of groceries stocked in the pantry. We also did purchase from the Ready Store, which is one of the several suppliers you can find online, some dehydrated and freeze-dried emergency food. Some of these things have 25-year shelf lives. We've got a collection of dried fruits, we've got a collection of dried meats, we've got a collection of various carbohydrates and starches and rice and different things that are in these plastic buckets and cans that have very long shelf life. So this is stuff we would not normally eat, but it's something that is an extra safety blanket there, just in case we go through our semi-perishable things that only have a 1 to 2 year shelf life. We know we've got this other stuff that's got really long shelf life, and still should have a fairly decent flavor, especially the freeze-dried stuff. Not too bad. We were really dismayed to find out that gardening is not allowed by our homeowners association, because gardening is just a great, I mentioned in the earlier episode that I was brought up gardening, so the idea of being able to provide for half of the year very fresh and very nutritious stuff for your family from your own resources is very compelling. And if you at all can do it, that's a great recommendation. We aren't allowed to in our area, but there's some ways to work around that with using pots or bins or window boxes, that sort of thing, to do some limited scale stuff. And whatever you can do, I would recommend people do gardening, but that's something that's not at a scale currently for us. And that would be a future, each of these topics I'd like to touch on what we're doing now and then what we're planning on doing next. And that's a serious next consideration for us, is getting to where we have some land where we could do a larger scale gardening. However, even though we don't have the ability currently to garden, we are utilizing some local producers of food and networking with friends who raise food. We've interviewed the guy next door on here on this channel, and you know that he's raising chickens and so on. So we're continuing to build relationships with local producers, and that's something that's important. We've used the farmers market here. If you have a farmers market in your community, or if you can get one in a nearby community, it's a great way to meet local producers and find out more. Ask lots of questions about where they're located. Can you come for a visit? We, in our previous home, had belonged to a community supported agriculture, CSA, which is basically it's a family owned farm where they have the ability to produce much more than their family needs, and so you buy shares of their crop for the season, and whatever number of shares is appropriate for your family, your needs. And every week we would receive a delivery of multiple large grocery boxes full of fresh produce, and my wife was just a magician at knowing how to process that stuff down through a food processor and turn it into soups and stews and add it to all kinds of different dishes. So that's very fresh, very local. We get to visit the farm, see how they did their methods, explain how they're building the soil and improving the conditions there, all through natural methods. Great way to support both the family-centered production of food and your local community. I know that you're getting stuff fresh, much more resilient. It didn't depend on any long-distance infrastructure, railroads or trucking or foreign oil or any of that kind of stuff to make it happen. So the next priority for us was water. We realized we typically had on hand just a few cases of bottled water, just for going to the health club or whatever, and that was not going to get us very far. And in a case of a real disruption or any kind of a line breakage for whatever reason, if there was a deep freeze or any kind that would cause a drop in our pressure or supply of safe city water, and we don't have well water here. Again, the guy next door was able to put a well on his property, so that gives him almost unlimited supply of his own private water source. We don't have that here, living in a suburban environment. So what we did initially was find a great sale price on bottled water. This is these 32 packs of half-liter bottles, and just stocked up. We bought large numbers. So we have probably a month or more supply of bottled water there to satisfy all of our drinking and grooming type needs. But then also based on referrals from a number of our visitors, guests here on the show, repeatedly endorsing the Berkey brand water filter, that Berkey, Berkey. So we went to the Ready store and bought a stainless steel 3-gallon Berkey water filter with extra filter elements, and then they have additional add-on filter elements for taking out fluoride and other heavy metals. And so we've got that at the ready, and we live not too far from some natural sources of open fresh water here. So in a pinch, we could supplement our purified bottled water supply by bringing in outside water, whether we would capture rainwater or whether we'd bring up water from one of the natural sources nearby and filter it through our Berkey unit to provide drinking water or cooking water, that sort of thing, for our family. And that's another area where we really need to take some additional steps in terms of larger scale water storage for things like bathing and so on. Air is another thing. Again, by the rule of 3, you can only live for 3 minutes without clean air. We have outfitted our home with a large HEPA, high efficiency particulate arrestor, HEPA air cleaner on each level of our home. The brand we chose was Austin Air. They have the largest capacity, like 30-pound of carbon filter with a 5-year warranty on the filter life. Which is, if you look at a lot of air filters, they have this little cartridge, smaller than a little box of Kleenex or something. That's the actual carbon cartridge in there. But this carbon cartridge is this huge cylinder, big around as like a tire. And it has the ability to remove a lot of both chemical gases and particulates from the air. So that's on each level of our home. We also put in a radon abatement system in our home. If you have a basement, you really should have it checked for radon. It's not that expensive to have it tested. It's usually a several days test. Any number of local providers can do that test for you. And radon is naturally occurring radioactive gas that seeps up from the ground more or less in different areas of the country depending on the ground formation. And its exposure to radon gas can give similar risks to your lung health as smoking. So especially if you have basement bedrooms, or if you have basement recreation room as we do and spend any time in your basement, it can really impact the healthfulness of your home environment. Since, that's what we're talking about a lot on this show, is protecting our families. And so the safety and healthfulness of your domestic castle starts with being able to have clean air to breathe inside your home. So really recommend people get their radon checked. And a radon abatement system can be anywhere from, say, $600 to $1,200 to have installed. Basically, it's a fan that pulls air from underneath your floor slab in your basement and blows it out the side of the house or up the roof. And it basically creates a lower pressure, so that any of that radon gas that would naturally be present in the ground around your foundation does not want to seep into your living space, because your living space that is at a higher pressure, because this fan is pulling from below your foundation, and it's making basically a vacuum cleaner underneath your house. It's pulling that radon gas from the ground so it never enters your house in the first place. It's a really great idea, and everybody should have that. In fact, some areas you can't even sell your house without that being in place, so you might as well do it just for your own peace of mind. And the next thing that we are considering is purchasing gas masks for family members. Now that's one thing, as soon as I say it or even think about saying it, I right away think, oh my gosh, this is one of those bunker mentality wacko things that only an extreme person, then how can I call myself a reluctant prepper if I'm using the word gas mask in the same sentence? But we live within a mile of 2 different railroad lines, and if you've seen any of the news stories about derailments of cars containing anhydrous ammonia or methane or propane or any of these other chemicals that get tanked around in tanker cars, it's quite possible that there could be. And we also live not too far from a petroleum refinery, and not too far from a sewage treatment plant. So there's credible reason to think that there could be an event that would make the air in our neighborhood dangerous. And if one of your options is evacuation, okay, if you can do that and if you find out in time, etc. But if you're trying to shelter in place, for any reason, if you need clean air to breathe for your family, it would be better to have that option than not. So in the past, we had purchased respirators and chemical filters, that sort of thing, when we were doing an amount of painting, because we have some chemical sensitivities in our family. So being able to have the ability to protect your family's breathing, if you think about it, your lungs are really, really delicate. There's very tiny little air sacs in there, the alveoli, and there's these little tiny capillaries, and there's all those little passageways in there, and you get one set of lungs. You don't have spares. So do what you need to do to protect your family's health in that way. And so that's something we'd be looking at going forward, potentially, is purchasing gas masks with chemical filters for the family. And again, I understand if you guys are having the same reaction that I am, that sounds extremist, but frankly, it's a prudent thing to have on your list, because you really can't live for minutes without clean air. So the next thing that we've talked about some in the past is gold and silver.